Sometimes a person with avoidant patterns secretly wishes they could reconnect, but they don't begin by reaching out. More often, they remain quietly at the edges of your life, close enough to observe, but not close enough to be emotionally exposed. Understanding that difference matters because silence doesn't always mean someone never cared. In many situations, the truth is much more complicated. They may feel pulled toward you while being just as afraid of what reconnecting might require. Instead of saying, "I miss you," or admitting they regret how things ended, they choose the safer path. They watch from a distance. They check your social media. They watch every story you post. They scroll through your pictures, notice who you're spending time with, where you're going, and how you're rebuilding your life without them. All of this can happen without a single message appearing in your inbox. Meanwhile, you're left believing their silence must mean they no longer care. But behind that silence, they may quietly ask mutual friends about you while pretending they're only casually curious. They wonder if you're doing well, whether you've healed, whether you still feel hurt, or if you've completely moved on. Some even keep the connection alive in subtle ways. They never block you. They quietly browse your profile. They create just enough distance to observe without risking emotional exposure. For them, watching feels much safer than standing in front of you and asking for another chance. Stay with me, because what they do next often reveals even more than their silence. From your side, all you experience is the absence of communication. That silence can make you feel forgotten, abandoned, or even embarrassed for still thinking about them. But every now and then, something catches your attention. Their name appears in your story views. A surprise like shows up on one of your posts. Somehow they seem to appear wherever your lives still overlap online. Those tiny moments can stir powerful emotions because you're still healing, still sensitive, and still wondering if they carry a hidden meaning. For them, quietly staying nearby often becomes a compromise between longing and fear. They replay old conversations in their mind. Places you once visited together remind them of your voice. Shared memories return when they least expect them. Yet actually reaching out feels overwhelming. What if you reject them? What if you've become emotionally distant? What if reconnecting forces them to face the pain they caused, the apologies they never gave, and the promises they couldn't keep? Instead of taking responsibility, they remain close in ways that require very little emotional risk. They convince themselves that simply watching your life is enough, that knowing you're okay is enough, that staying somewhere inside your digital world somehow keeps the connection alive without requiring complete honesty. But don't click away yet, because this next part explains why those quiet actions don't always lead to real change. Their silent presence isn't only about missing you. Often it's also about managing their own emotions. If they notice you're struggling, they may feel guilty while also finding comfort in knowing they're still important to you. If they see you becoming happier, they may feel relieved that you've recovered, yet also afraid you've healed enough to never welcome them back again. Meanwhile, you're trying to rebuild your own life while filling the silence with difficult questions. If they really cared, wouldn't they reach out? If they truly wanted another chance, wouldn't they fight for it? Those questions make complete sense because secretly wanting someone back isn't the same as being emotionally prepared to build a healthy relationship. Feelings alone don't create lasting change. Sometimes fear, shame, and avoidance become stronger than love itself, at least for a while. When someone with avoidant tendencies wants to reconnect, they rarely begin with dramatic confessions. More often, they stay nearby without fully stepping forward. They quietly watch your healing, like someone reading the next chapter of a story, searching for signs that your feelings haven't completely disappeared. They hold on to the comforting belief that they could return whenever they finally feel ready, and that can become one of the hardest parts for you. While you're doing the painful work of letting go, they may be doing the much easier work of keeping the possibility alive inside their own imagination. This kind of quiet orbit isn't what healthy love looks like. It's affection held back by fear. It's connection filtered through emotional distance. It's longing that never grows into responsibility. That's why your attention shouldn't become trapped in analyzing every story view, every like, or every small online interaction. Your focus should remain on remembering what healthy love actually requires. Real love doesn't hide forever. It accepts responsibility, communicates honestly, and chooses vulnerability, even when it's uncomfortable. It's completely possible for someone to think about you far more often than you realize, while still being unable or unwilling to show up in a meaningful way. That's an important distinction. Private feelings matter far less than consistent actions. Over time, those quiet signals may become a little more noticeable. A random like appears, a short reply to your story arrives, an old inside joke suddenly lands in your inbox. These tiny gestures feel much safer for them than saying, "I miss you," or "I'm sorry for how I treated you." Behind those small actions is often an ongoing inner conflict. One part of them wants to leave the past behind. Another keeps returning to your photos, your words, and the comfort they once felt around you. So they choose the smallest possible step, hoping to ease the longing without exposing themselves completely. Maybe they like a recent photo where you seem happier than before. Maybe they suddenly react to an older post. To them, that tiny action quietly reassures them that some invisible connection might still exist. Then comes a simple story reply, a laughing emoji, a shared memory, or a short comment that seems ordinary to everyone else. But for you, every small interaction carries years of shared history. You remember the unanswered messages, the painful silence, and the moments when you begged for even a fraction of the attention they're now giving so casually. Suddenly, they're initiating contact, however small, and your heart doesn't know whether to feel hopeful or cautious. Just seeing their name on your screen can awaken memories before your mind has time to think clearly. Your heartbeat changes, your chest tightens. Old hope quietly returns because it isn't just another notification. It feels like the possibility that everything could still mean something. When a person with avoidant habits begins acting differently after time apart, it's easy to assume their earlier distance meant they never cared. But sometimes what looked like indifference was actually emotional self-protection. Instead of admitting how conflicted they felt, they hid behind familiar defenses because they didn't know how to face those emotions honestly. The first signs of renewed interest may appear through a simple message asking how you've been, a playful joke, or a comment about how much your life has changed. Underneath those casual words may be something much deeper. They may simply be trying to discover whether there's still a place for them in your world. And while those small gestures can show you're still on their mind, remember this above everything else. Lasting relationships are never built on hints. They're built on honesty, responsibility, and actions that continue long after the first message is sent. Those small actions may point to unresolved emotions or an inner struggle that you can't fully see. But it's important to remember one thing. Having feelings and being emotionally ready for a healthy relationship are not the same thing. Missing someone doesn't automatically mean they're prepared to rebuild trust, repair the damage, or create something stronger than before. That difference is what you need to protect. Those brief interactions may help them feel safer, but they don't automatically give you the security, clarity, or consistency you deserve. They're carefully testing the water while you're the one who already survived the storm. Because your heart still remembers the closeness you once shared, it's easy to treat every small sign like the beginning of a real reunion. But don't forget yourself in the process. Don't lose sight of the version of you that worked so hard to heal. If every short message is welcomed with the same emotional access as a sincere apology, there may be very little reason for the conversation to become deeper. Real accountability asks for much more than a late-night hey. It asks for honesty, responsibility, genuine regret, and consistent effort shown over time. Stay with me, because this next part may completely change how you look at every message they send. This is where your strength begins returning. Instead of asking only, what does this message mean for them? Start asking yourself, what do I need right now? What helps me feel emotionally safe? Have they actually shown the honesty, consistency, and effort that match the relationship I want? Those questions matter far more than trying to decode every notification or every emoji. If your answer is no, you have every right to treat their message exactly as it appears. A small interaction, not a promise that everything has changed. You're allowed to pause before replying. You're allowed to answer briefly. You're allowed to create healthy boundaries, or even choose not to respond at all. A few small gestures don't require you to settle for less than the love you truly deserve. Sometimes, instead of offering a direct apology, they slowly try to find their way back into your life through casual conversations. A funny meme arrives late at night. A message says, "This made me think of you." They ask a simple question they could easily answer themselves. Maybe they react to your story with a laughing emoji, almost as if the silence between you never happened. Moments like these can leave you staring at your screen, wondering what they really mean. One part of your heart hopes this is the beginning of something new. Another part remembers unanswered messages, lonely nights, and all the moments you waited for conversations that never came. Casual contact can sometimes help ease their uncertainty without asking them to face the harder emotional work. If you respond warmly, they may quietly feel relieved that the connection hasn't completely disappeared. That reassurance may calm their anxiety without requiring them to admit guilt, offer a sincere apology, or explain what has truly changed. Instead of saying, "I know I hurt you," or "I've spent time thinking about everything that happened," they may hide those deeper feelings behind ordinary conversation, hoping you'll naturally carry the emotional weight of reconnecting. Sometimes they begin talking as though the breakup barely happened at all. They ask, "How have you been?" or "What's new?" while skipping over the silence that came before. Yet you remember those months clearly. You remember rebuilding your confidence while wondering why they disappeared. If you respond politely, they may see it as a sign that communication is possible again. On the outside, they may act as though sending that message wasn't a big deal. Inside, however, they may have spent days or even weeks deciding whether to press send. Admitting that level of vulnerability feels uncomfortable, so they quietly hide it behind casual conversation. But don't miss what comes next, because this is often where your healing becomes stronger than your hope. As you continue growing, these small interactions become easier to recognize for what they truly are. They can be attempts to reconnect emotionally without fully accepting responsibility for what happened. They may miss your presence, your kindness, your conversations, and the comfort you once gave them while still avoiding the difficult words that real healing requires. Sometimes the conversation begins with something completely ordinary. They ask about a cafe you once visited together, a movie you both enjoyed, or a small favor you once did for them. Maybe they ask, "Do you remember that place we used to go?" Or, "Do you still have that article you sent me?" On the surface, it's just a practical question. Underneath, it may simply be a safer way of saying, "I've been thinking about you." Sometimes they choose humor instead. They send an inside joke that only the two of you understand. They mention a shared memory that instantly brings back another chapter of your life together. For a moment, the familiar rhythm returns, and so does the comfort. But notice what still isn't happening. They're not openly acknowledging how the relationship ended. They're not taking responsibility for the pain that was created. They're not consistently showing through actions that they've become someone you can safely trust again. They're staying close enough to feel connected, while remaining far enough away to avoid true vulnerability. This is where your own healing becomes incredibly valuable. There may have been a time when even these tiny gestures felt like everything. A late-night meme might have convinced you they still cared, while your imagination filled in all the missing pieces. You built hope from the smallest signs because your heart desperately wanted a different ending. But healing changes the questions you ask. Instead of wondering, "Do they secretly want me back?" you begin asking something much healthier. Is this the level of effort they're truly willing to offer? And perhaps the most important question of all becomes, is that enough for me anymore? Those questions quietly return your power to where it belongs. You deserve someone who doesn't slip back into your life through side doors just to avoid difficult conversations. You deserve someone who arrives openly, waits patiently, accepts responsibility, and says, "I understand the pain I caused. I know what I risked losing. If you're willing, I'd like to rebuild this honestly." Until someone's actions consistently reflect that level of accountability, casual contact often reveals far more about their emotional comfort than it does about your value. And you're completely allowed to decide that halfway effort is no longer enough. Sometimes the greatest act of self-respect isn't answering every message. Sometimes it's waiting for actions that finally match the words. Another confusing change can happen once your healing starts becoming visible. As you slowly rebuild your life, someone who once seemed comfortable with the distance may suddenly become much more attentive. That shift can feel confusing, especially after months of emotional absence. For a long time, the pattern probably felt painfully familiar. You reached out while they pulled away. You explained your feelings while they became quieter. Your emotions depended on whether they replied, how long they took, or whether they sounded warm or distant. Then, little by little, something changed inside you. You stopped measuring your days by their attention. Instead of checking whether they viewed your stories, you started checking in with your own emotional well-being. You invested your energy back into yourself. You focused on your work, your goals, your friendships, and your own peace. Whether they understand everything it took for you to reach that place or not, they often notice the difference. They don't see the nights you cried, the journal pages you filled, the therapy sessions, the boundaries you practiced, or the mornings when you forced yourself to keep moving despite the pain. What they usually notice is the result. They see your confidence growing. They notice your life becoming fuller. They realize your world no longer revolves around them. And that's often when their attention quietly begins returning. Stay with me, because what happens next is where many people unknowingly fall back into the same cycle. As your focus shifts away from them, they may begin noticing changes they once ignored. Suddenly they comment on how different you seem. They notice your confidence, your energy, or the new direction your life is taking. Sometimes those comments come wrapped in humor or playful teasing, but beneath the surface there may be genuine curiosity about the person you've become. Occasionally, that curiosity can even appear as subtle jealousy. They ask who you're spending time with. They notice someone new in your photos. They make small remarks suggesting you've moved on faster than they expected. Those reactions can leave you wondering why someone who once wanted distance now seems unsettled by your independence. Part of the answer is simple. Your growth has made the possibility of losing you feel real. The version of you who once waited patiently is slowly disappearing, replaced by someone building a fulfilling life that doesn't depend on their return. But don't confuse their discomfort with lasting change. Feeling your absence isn't the same as becoming emotionally ready for a healthy relationship. Being affected by your growth doesn't automatically mean they've grown too. If you give up the strength you worked so hard to build simply because they start paying attention again, you risk returning to the same emotional pattern that once left you exhausted. And that's exactly what you don't want to repeat. Slowly, without realizing it, you may begin making yourself smaller again. You soften your boundaries so they won't feel uncomfortable. You become available whenever they appear. Before long, you're carrying the emotional weight of the relationship all over again, while they remain uncertain. When someone seems drawn toward you one day and distant the next, it's completely natural to want an explanation. They may act as though nothing has changed, while their behavior quietly tells a different story. But your responsibility isn't to solve their inner conflict or convince them to understand themselves. Your responsibility is to protect the clarity you've worked so hard to build. You can recognize that someone is struggling without sacrificing your own peace. You can acknowledge their uncertainty while still deciding that uncertainty isn't enough for you anymore. You can quietly remind yourself, if there's ever going to be another chapter between us, it must be built on honesty, consistency, accountability, and real effort. And if those qualities aren't present, you don't need to pause your healing just because someone else hasn't finished theirs. That's one of the most powerful decisions you can make. It keeps your future from becoming trapped inside someone else's unfinished emotional journey. One of the hardest truths to accept is that someone can think about you often while still being unable or unwilling to show up in the way you deserve. Many people revisit past relationships long after they've ended. They replay conversations in their mind. They remember places you visited together. Familiar songs, routines, and quiet moments suddenly bring old memories rushing back. With enough distance, people sometimes begin seeing situations differently than they did while living through them. They question old arguments, moments when they withdrew, unanswered messages, and conversations they avoided. They wonder whether they misunderstood your needs or whether fear influenced choices they once defended without hesitation. Those reflections may be deeply meaningful to them. They may finally ask themselves difficult questions. Why did I pull away? Why was emotional closeness so difficult? Why couldn't I stay present when the relationship needed me most? Those questions can become the beginning of genuine personal growth. But don't miss this important distinction. Reflection alone doesn't rebuild trust. Regret alone doesn't repair a relationship. Real growth isn't measured by what someone privately feels. It's measured by what they consistently choose to do. People often deal with uncomfortable emotions by keeping themselves busy. They throw themselves into work, spend hours scrolling on their phone, fill every free moment with distractions, or imagine how life might have looked if they had made different choices. They replay moments when they could have communicated more honestly, stayed instead of leaving, or chosen courage instead of fear. Those what-if thoughts can become painful because they reveal possibilities that no longer exist, exactly as they once did. Looking back honestly often means recognizing not only what was lost, but also what fear may have cost them. They may finally appreciate your patience, your kindness, the support you gave, and the belief you had in them when they struggled to believe in themselves. Time often makes people value what they overlooked. But here's the truth that protects your future. Someone's private regrets, silent apologies, or hidden feelings, even if completely sincere, cannot become the foundation of your next chapter. Your heart wasn't broken by thoughts hidden inside another person's mind. It was hurt by actions, choices, silence, inconsistency, and the absence of what you needed when you needed it most. Until those actions consistently change, whatever they secretly feel remains part of their journey, not your responsibility. Their healing belongs to them. Their lessons belong to them. Your responsibility is different. It's to remember that your love always had value, your presence always mattered, and today you deserve a relationship where you don't have to guess, analyze, or survive on possibilities. You deserve love that is expressed openly, supported by consistent actions, and strong enough that it never asks you to sacrifice your peace just to keep it.